Week 7, Overview. In the Wilderness, the Tabernacle and the Law. This week begins a 3-week mini-unit that we've called In the Wilderness. Each week we'll study events that occurred during the life of Moses that were recorded in one or more of his 5 books. In Exodus 15, the Israelites were dancing on the far side of the Red Sea as the waves rolled over Pharaoh's army. Exodus is 40 chapters long, though. What happened in those other 25 chapters? The rest of Exodus tells about the year the Israelites spent at the foot of Mount Sinai, where God gave them a renewed covenant. He provided the tabernacle, a visible means for meeting with an invisible God. He provided a whole series of festivals and holy days to remind them of their history of redemption and His ever-present providence. He gave them a perfect law consistent with His holiness. If you have a decent Bible atlas, you can trace the path the Israelites took from the Red Sea down to Sinai. Along the way, they ran out of food and water and encountered their first pitched battle. God gave them manna to eat and brought water out of the rock for them. He gave them victory over the Amalekites. It took 3 months to make the trek to Sinai, and already Moses was getting worn out by the challenge of riding herd on such a multitude. With 600,000 men on the move, Moses may well have been responsible for around 2 million people. And he was the only government this mob knew. It was enough to wear anybody out. Fortunately, God gave Moses a wise counselor, his father-in-law, Jethro. Jethro watched him trying cases all day long for just one day and said, "This has to stop. You're wearing yourself out." Jethro advised Moses to choose capable judges and to write down laws for the people. This was the beginning of a new government, and with it, the Israelites began the transition from a mob to a new nation. Moses took Jethro's advice to write down the laws, but it was God who chiseled them into stone with His own finger. God appeared to the Israelites at Mount Sinai in smoke and thunder. Exodus 19 says, "On the morning of the 3rd day there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast that all the people in the camp trembled. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke, because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him in thunder. The Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain. And the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up." God gave Moses the 10 Commandments there. They aren't the only laws God gave to His people, but they are the most familiar. They may be Old Testament law, but they aren't out of date or irrelevant. The book of Exodus includes what we call case law, as well as God's initial commandments. Now, case law is what you get when you try to apply a commandment, like "you shall not murder," to the complexities of a real-life case. For example, Exodus 21 says, "Whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint a place for you to which he may flee. But if a man willfully attacks another to kill him by cunning, you shall take him from my altar, that he may die." In this one little passage, we see 3 different situations. There's the basic concept, a death penalty for those who kill. There's an exception to that rule, a city of refuge for those who kill on impulse. There's an exception to that exception, no refuge for premeditated murder. Such exceptions emerge as you try to apply the unchanging principles of justice to the countless complexities of real life. The concept of case law will be important in our study of history and government. English and American law in particular has developed in a whole series of cases that refine and distinguish the meanings of the law. The Somerville family developed a whole body of case law around reading books. When I was in law school, just learning about case law for the first time, I noticed that our children were always squabbling over books. Now, I wanted them to enjoy reading without fighting, so I made up a simple rule. Whoever starts reading a book should be able to read it as if nobody else was in the house. Little did I know this would turn into the infamous book laws. My rule seemed so simple. But what happened when a child started reading one book, and then started reading another, and then another, until he had first claim on all the good books in the house? That didn't seem right, so I made a new rule. If you start a second book, you lose your claim on the first. Okay, but what if you have to do schoolwork? Should you lose your claim on Narnia because you read a spelling book? So another rule was born. Textbooks don't count. You can't imagine how complicated a family full of Pharisees can make a simple rule. If your kids love to read, you might enjoy trying your own set of book rules. Be warned, though, it's not as easy as it sounds. In Exodus 24, after God gave the people His commandments, Moses built an altar and sacrificed there. The essence of this exchange, which fills most of chapters 19 through 24, is expressed in Exodus 19, verses 4 through 8. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my commandment, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you were to speak to the Israelites." So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." The sacred covenant that God established with Israel follows a specific form. It followed the format developed by the ancient Hittite kings, who established a covenant with people when they took them under their dominion. These kingly covenants were radically unlike a bargain or our modern contracts. The Hittite covenants between a vassal and a lord originated entirely with the superior party. The vassal had a choice. They could accept or reject the arrangement, for covenants generally imply a two-way relationship, but they could not negotiate or alter the terms of the disposition in any way. God's covenant with Israel has the same quality. The people could agree to be God's covenant people or not, but they couldn't haggle over terms. They couldn't try to bargain it down to 6 commandments and a couple of suggestions. As we noted last week, a covenant is binding even if one party breaks their promise. God would keep his promise to be Israel's Lord even if Israel wouldn't obey. Israel's disobedience resulted in covenant chastening instead of covenant blessing, but it could not change the covenant. God's covenant relationship with Israel was uniquely expressed through his holy law. But there's more to the covenant than the law. Galatians 3:24 says, "The law was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ." The law was always to be a means to an end, and the end of the law was to enable mankind to be with God himself. Exodus 25-31 spells out instructions for building and consecrating the tabernacle, the place for meeting with God. In a number of specific ways, the tabernacle is an image of Eden. It was decorated with pomegranates and cherubim, reflections of the fruit trees of paradise and the angels that guard its gate. The gate of Eden is to the east, according to Genesis 3:24, and so was the doorway to the tabernacle. The people responded with amazing generosity to Moses' call for materials to construct this tabernacle. Exodus 36:7 says, "Moses gave command, and word was proclaimed throughout the camp. Let no man or woman do anything more for the contribution for the sanctuary." So the people were restrained from bringing, for the material they had was sufficient to do all the work and more. When you list the greatest miracles in Scripture, it wouldn't hurt to include that verse. See the same phenomenon when King David asked the people to contribute to the temple. Have you ever seen people give so much that the leaders had to tell them to stop? Well, knowing how easy it is for human beings to turn away from him, God gave the Israelites periodic holy days for rest, celebration, and remembrance of his goodness. On these days, no work was done, and various aspects of God's character or his work were glorified. During our 3-week mini-unit, we'll look at 6 biblical feasts that were instituted by God through Moses in the wilderness. This week, your children will focus on the feast that happens every week. The Israelites call it Shabbat. Gentiles call it the Sabbath, God's day of rest. What does your church teach about the Sabbath? Some emphasize it, others pretty much ignore it. How does your family celebrate this day? We've always tried to remember the 7th day somehow. We want our children to believe that it's the best day of the week. No matter how busy we've been, Sunday has always been the day of the week with no other plans. We've splurged on hot fudge and whipped cream so that we could regularly have Sundays on Sunday. That's one way to make sure little children think of God's holy day as the best day of the week. So, God met with Israel at Mount Sinai, and he established his covenant with them. That included his law, but there's so much more to his covenant relationship with his people than just the law. God revealed himself to his own holy people as the promise-making, promise-keeping God. He commanded them to create a place of beauty for meeting with him, an image of Eden, where God walked with man in the cool of the day.